So after we've finished the cleaning process, we now check, just do a final check that the patch you pre-cut earlier is actually matching and is actually contained within the cleaned area that you've cleaned up. And in this case we can see that we've got a nice clean area all around it. The area under the patch is quite clean as well. So now we're ready to start the welding process. With the welding process, the critical part is the heat setting. If we set the heat setting too hot, there's not enough time between when the material starts to melt and when it over melts or burns. So the idea is just to have the heat setting quite gentle and just enough to melt the material. So to do that, this is a Leicester gun. We set this heat setting to about half power is what we do, but each gun and each power setting will be different. But we do a small test now just to confirm that the heat setting is okay. So I've got this set to about half power. We grab a small sample of material and we just do a preliminary weld, and what we should be able to do is we should be able to actually touch the nozzle onto the material without damaging it, and we should be able to leave it still without burning it too quickly. In this case I'm leaving it there for quite some time, and I can see now just in front here, as I leave it sit for some time, I can now see the patch starting to turn to liquid. But fairly obviously it's not too hot, it's not burning the material quickly, it's quite slow. And a nice slow melt like this is the safest way to do a repair. So once we're happy with the heat setting, if you haven't done a repair for some time, it's a good idea to actually grab a spare piece of material and do a practice patch before you actually start working on the regular piece of material. If you've been doing repairs previously, you can probably go straight into doing the patch on the proper material. But if in doubt, I'd always suggest you actually do a trial patch on a piece of material first, just to get the hands and the coordination of the heat working together, and probably just a small sample of that. Here's a trial patch, not the one that we're intending to use. If I just do a little practice weld just to make sure my heat settings are right, is probably a good practice. Just hit a board on top of the material so I don't burn the membrane that I'm going to repair, and I'll just do this little test patch first just to make sure everything's set up properly. The welding process is very simple. You just basically have a piece of patch material. You just clamp that into position with a rubber roller. The roller we like to use is a silicon roller because the silicon absorbs heat but doesn't melt, and also it's got some softness to it. A wooden roller you can do it, but it's a bit harsh. So a rubber roller tends to melt the edges of the patches nice and round and is very soft and gentle on the material. So all we do is we just clamp the material in position with the roller with our thumb on top. We insert the nozzle into the gap between the two materials, and then we just gently move the roller forward, pressing down the piece of material that we've just melted between the nozzle, or the two patches of material. And we just gradually work our way towards the front. As you can see, the heat is quite slow. There's no panic or no rush in getting it done. And we just have a look at that. Again, we need to allow that to cool before we can test it properly. A good idea, just to help it to cooling process, is to use a piece of metal or something similar just to act as a heat sink to take the heat out of the patch, just so it cools off properly. So we allow that to cool properly. And then again we do just a quick peel test, and being urethane, it's extremely strong, and basically if it's welded properly should be basically impossible to peel apart without a very strong pair of pliers. So there's a very quick test to ensure that our temperature and settings are right, and now we're ready to go and repair the main membrane. So now we've done our test weld. And now what we'll do is we'll just apply this patch to the area we've cleaned. Again, there's the cut position, so we ensure that the cut is central on the patch. The patch is inside the width of the roller. We put the roller about halfway along the patch, hold it in position, fold the patch back over on top of the roller with the thumb. And now, knowing that the heat setting is right on the roller, we simply insert the nozzle into the gap between the roller, the membrane and the material and the patch material, and we just gently roll the patch onto the membrane. So we're heating up in between the two surfaces, and we're just gently rolling along and heating the two of them. And at the end of the weld, we can see that there's a little, you can see on the edges a little bit of melt around the edges of the patch, and we can also see on the end, we can see just a little bit of overrun of melted material, which tells us that the material is melted on properly. We then pull the material back to the start point, so we get a nice straight line for where we started the original weld. And now we reverse the process. So again, we grab the material with our thumb, make a nice straight V here. And this time we insert the welding nozzle from the other end. And again, we repeat the process where we just gently heat it up and move the nozzle out. And again, because the heat setting is not too high, we've got plenty of time to actually do the process. We're not trying to rush. And again, we've got just a little bit of molten polyurethane over the end of the weld, which is fine. It just tells us that the two layers were melting nicely. So effectively, once we've done that for a small hole, that patch is probably okay. But just to improve the quality of the patch, quite often with the fruits and the stems, they will grip on the sharp edges of a patch. So what we'd like to do now is we'd like to actually round out these sharp edges of the patches. To do this, we just apply heat around the edge of the patch like so, and wait until we see some visible melt, and then we just gently with the rubber roller roll that edge in, and you can sort of see where the top layer of the patch and the top layer of the membrane are now blending together in a nice smooth curve. And what we do now, we just gradually work our way just gently around the patch, heating that edge region and then pressing it down with our silicone roller, and it just gives that nice smooth curve that is less likely to get grabbed by the stalks. With this process as well, it's done very slowly. The heat is a very low heat setting, so that it doesn't matter. I can actually touch this, it doesn't do any damage, so it's just gently working over the top of it. And now we've got all the edges nice and rounded and very well prepared. And that there, once it's cooled off, is for a small cut, basically all that's needed for a repair. You'll notice, seeing as we're working on urethane and we've had our power settings or heat settings quite low, there hasn't been big flumes of smoke coming up. It's been quite pleasant environment as long as we have our protective equipment on when we're using our MEK. Other than that, it's quite a decent environment. If we're repairing PVC, we also have the smoke coming up, which is, not a favourable position to be in. The next demonstration is repairing a larger hole. So, as we can see, This here is large, typical of a mouse hole with an extended cut coming out of it. So we're probably about 4 inches long and probably about 2 inches wide. So we'll do a repair to show how to do that. First process is to select a patch that's going to cover the area sufficiently. What we will do is we'll do one patch from the wind side, and the patch on the wind side will be a smaller patch that gives about 1/2, 3/4 of an inch coverage over the extremities of the damage, and then we will put a larger patch on the reverse side or on the air side of the membrane. It's always a good idea when you're putting a patch on either side of the membrane is to ensure that the two patches are of different size. If we make both patches the same size and we put them on either side of the membrane and we align them on top of each other, we end up with a situation where we have single thickness of membrane then going up onto 3 layers where the patch is, and this area of the patch becomes quite rigid and you can get severe flexing or stress damage down along the side. So what we'd like to do is have one patch smaller and the patch on the other side larger, and probably, you know, roughly an inch or so bigger on all sizes, so that now we go from one layer of membrane to an extra layer of patch followed by the 3rd layer of patch, so we don't have as severe a hinge joint on the edge going from 1 to 3 layers. So for this repair we will now select a patch size, and again the width of this patch is pretty good. We've got about 1 inch coverage on either side of the membrane. We'll take this about 1 inch past, come to about 1 inch past there, we'll trim the patch off to about this length, which gives us good coverage around the extremities of the patch. So we'll just shorten the patch to suit. Again, just round the edges of the material. Now we position this, the patch material that we've made, we position that centrally over the hole. We just mark around the edge of the patch so we know the area that we need to clean. These lines will come off when we start cleaning it, but just gives a feel for the area. So we've got to make sure that we sort of clean out to an area of about this large to make sure that that's done.